Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. I'm again joined by Logos. This is episode 24 of the Grindset stream, 24 of Escaping the Moldbug Matrix. So, just FYI, we just finished How Dawkins Got Pwned. And, my joke is, where's Dawkins instead of where's Waldo? Because Dawkins doesn't really show up in all that. The big takeaway that Logos and I found was that, in many ways, Moldbug kind of reinvents himself in this essay. And this is actually that was the first big important essay that was a must read for everybody. So yeah, everything before that, if you didn't read it, you're going to get a very different perspective in November with How Dawkins Got Pwned. So this is a summary, Logos. Anything you want to add to that summary before we dig in?
No, I mean, I'd specify that the main way he changed what he said was about formalism, which is central to his work and his defense of neo-cameralism. Me and Todd did a Twitter thread about it on Twitter if you want to check out some of that, if you didn't see the last episode. Or you can watch the last episode. Either way, it's good.
Yeah, either way, it's good. Okay. Musharraf's Rebellion or How to Read a Newspaper, November 8th, 2007. Sometimes history just serves you up really juicy examples. Days when the papers are this easy to read are rare. They are not complex and must be drunk young like a Bejulius. In Campana, they say a mozzarella de bufala is over the hill after sunset on the day it's made, and some say afternoon. I suspect this post will be obsolete at most within the next month, but it might be tomorrow. But with that caveat, today there are a couple of cute articles about Pakistan in the Wall Street Journal. These articles don't actually tell us what's going on in Pakistan. In fact, they are active, if quite unconscious, attempts to mislead us about what's going on in Pakistan. But this is just the art of reading newspaper. The newspaper's adaptive goal is to persuade its readers, who include you, to adopt some perspective on the subject of Pakistan. Without in any way adopting or even considering this perspective, frankly, why should it be worth considering? We can understand Pakistan by understanding the effect that the text is designed to have on its unwary reader. Of course, we also need to know who wrote it and why. And first, we need some background about what's going on in Pakistan. There are three factions fighting for power in Pakistan today: the Islamists, the civilists, and the army. The Islamists are too well known to describe. The civilists are basically the Soros people, the civil society types, lawyers, judges, journalists, and politicians. The army is the Pakistani military, Musharraf and his people. The basic plot of the story is that Musharraf is rebelling against Washkor. His motivation for taking this step is that he believes that if he doesn't, he will end up either exiled, dead, or in prison. In my opinion, this perspective is accurate. These events are taking place now because of the weakening of the Pentagon and the White House faction, the neoconservative defense hawks who have controlled the U.S. military since 2001. This weakening is a natural consequence of the fact that the Bush administration is timing out a normal structural phenomena in wash core power politics. Well, let's just stop here, Logos. That aged horribly. The neocons weakening? What is he talking about?
Yeah, the neocons never weakened.
They never weakened. And now, again, we know in hindsight that Obama was the third term of Bush as far as foreign policy goes. And people like Chomsky used to say that.
Yep.
But even in 2007 was the surge. That's when the surge started. Does that sound like a waning of neocon influence?
No. I mean, Obama hadn't even taken office yet, so there's not even a good narrative reason for this.
Right, but the surge had already happened under Bush, under Petraeus. So the surge itself is a expression of the neocon agenda. So I don't know what he's talking about here. Neocons are really best described as retro universalists. Their great dream is to try to restore a kind of faded 1950s version of universalism. There was no possibility of success in this effort, but they certainly can keep themselves employed by trying. What is that supposed to mean? That's not the neocon goal.
No, it's not. They're not universalists at all. They're basically Henry Kissinger-esque people that think like everybody in the world is pieces on a chessboard, and all foreign policy should be some imperial maneuvers for the benefit of the United States. That's basically it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is just As for the neo-universalist adversaries, the Polygon proper, there must be some avian mascot that fits the bill. but it's certainly no member of the pigeon family. I have a pair of semi-tame ravens that come regularly to my deck for peanuts, which I've taught them to catch in the air. I think the polygon's bird has to be some kind of corvid. The only real question is whether it's a blue jay, a crow, or a raven. For now, I'll stick with the last. When the hawks were strong enough, they could afford to protect Musharraf. Weak, they're forced to sacrifice him. Thus, the neoconservative near unanimity on the subject with only a few dissenters. Many neocons can still stomach al-Mushi, but they are politically unable to afford to avoid attaching the John Hancock to a demand for elections within 3 months. Now, okay, 2007 is a long, long time ago, but if I remember correctly, wasn't one of the problems with Musharraf his coziness with the Taliban?
I don't know, man.
Because I
Foreign
remember,
policy there is not my strong suit. I'll defer to you on this one.
I vaguely remember back in 2007, one of the reasons why the Taliban insurgency kept going was because there's Pashtuns on the Pakistani side of the border, and they could hide out there as sanctuaries. And the complaint that I remember the U.S. having was that the Pakistani government turned a blind eye to this. And since the Pakistani government was our ally, we couldn't really directly get involved and attack them in order to put pressure on the Taliban. So that might be some of this. But, well, this is a ludicrous demand. It creates a point of bipartisan unanimity within Washcore, and all major players in the post-war period automatically defer to any unanimous demand of Washcore, whose internal structure they understand far better than that of the average hobbit. For example, if you read the Tiananmen Papers, which narrate the decision of the leaders of China during the Tiananmen Square incident, there is some debate over the authenticity of these documents, but if they are not real, they are very convincing fiction. The Chinese Politburo and elders receive and read not a daily summary of the State Department communiques, not of Pentagon press releases, not of Washington White House statements, but of the Western press. And access, as they say, is power. The modern official press is coordination signal orders of magnitude more reliable than any other diplomatic channel. I mean, that's just, on the face of it, ridiculous, Logos. Like, the press has been wrong so many times on international affairs.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I don't understand. Where is Moldbug coming from privileging the press like the New York Times? Like, I remember in college, people were talking, which is 2007, people were talking about New York Times subscriptions going way down. It was already in trouble in 2007. So, like, where does this influence that he ascribes to it come from? And where does his fetishization of it come from? That doesn't make sense.
I think he's trying to be a harbinger of things to come, because the New York Times was probably in transition to getting more and more and more government access from secret docs. So think about all the leaks that happened during Trump, straight to the New York Times. You had people leaking stuff straight from the government to the press. And so what you're starting to see in this time is the incestuous relationship between the press and the government building. Now, if Moldbug knows somebody on the Council of Foreign Relations, and they're talking to Moldbug about this, then Moldbug is probably looking 5 years ahead of the curve in that transition. Press isn't perfect yet. Relationship isn't fully formalized, but there you go.
Well, that could very well be true. And that's the sort of theory that I'm running with. So, in any case, the Pakistani army is primarily aligned with the Washcore Hawks, and the Pakistani civilists are primarily aligned with the Washcore Ravens. The Islamists, of course, have no alliance with any Washcore faction, at least no direct alliance. Well, that's just patently stupid, because the Pashtun holdouts were protected by the military. The Pakistani military protected them. And Moldbug should know this, so the reason why he's not saying it is for some other ulterior motive, whatever that might be. Therefore, the events in Pakistan follow the usual pattern of Western colonial proxy wars. The two factions struggling for power within Washcore nurture and support corresponding Pakistani factions. The provincial struggle is often a bit more rowdy, but it exists solely because of the invisible power struggle within the Beltway. We can therefore use events in Pakistan as a sort of amplifier to help us observe the delicate change in Washington. Think of it as a sort of beltwology. In terms of Pakistani politics alone, however, the structure of this conflict is simple. The army side is A, presently dominant. The civilist and Islamist side B, precisely subordinate. Yes, I'm aware that this is not a conflict as we normally hear it described. That's kind of the point. As usual, the only way to test an alternative analysis is to simply adopt it, at least rhetorically work within its context for a while, and see how generally true it rings. If side A loses, it can only lose decisively, and after all, it's the army. The resultant fighting will be between the civilists and Islamists. The Islamists will win with the first round knockout. The civilists on the top rung of the officer corps will end up exiled, dead, or in prison, and the rest of the army will be subordinated. The Islamist army alliance of the 80s will be reestablished, probably in a more virulent form, and Pakistan will become an open ally of Iran. If side A wins decisively, the Islamists and civilists will end up exiled, politically irrelevant, or in prison. If side A wins weakly, the outcome is a draw. As the IRA used to say, we only have to be lucky once. The conflict will continue in its present state indefinitely, and Pakistan will remain unstable. The army has been forced to roll the dice, however, because of its weakening as the result of trends within Watch Corps. Obviously, the outcome I prefer is the middle decisive victory for side A. If you disagree with this result, either you do not agree with the decision analysis or your position is objectively hostile to Pakistan, which is totally fine, by the way. Not everyone has to be friends. Note, there are no pleasant outcomes for the civilists in this decision tree. This is normal for those who accept the role of shills, puppets, and collaborators. Quislings can always be found. The ugly fact is that the civilist movement in Pakistan is basically a criminal mafia, or more precisely, a consortium of several criminal mafias. It is fundamentally corrupt and utterly irredeemable. I'm quite confident in saying that nothing good will ever come of it. For example, read this article by one Jamima Khan about Mrs. Bhutto. Now, isn't that interesting? Who does that make you think of? Well, obviously one name looms large, Michael Corleone. But for anyone who's seen The Departed, as I just did, I'm afraid this is what I'm supposed to say, by Infernal Affairs really was much better. Now, wait. Oh, it's a film. Okay. There is another figure, Whitey Bulger. Jack Nicholson's character in The Departed is an obvious impression of the notorious Mr. Bulger. But wait, who is Jemima Khan, and how do you get a name like Jemima Khan anyway? For those too busy to follow the links, Jemima Khan is a British socialite who happened to be married to a cricket star and Pakistani politician, Imran Khan, who happens to have been arrested the other day. One suspects Jemima does not approve, but one also suspects that her motivation for informing Telegraph readers about the true nature of Mrs. Bhutto and her party is slightly less than altruistic. It's not a rose garden out there, kids. We are now prepared to read the first piece in the Wall Street Journal, an op-ed by Hassan Haqqani. It's important to know that the back two stages of the A section of the Wall Street Journal are composed by an entirely separate organization from the rest of the paper. Call them the WSJR and WJSL. WJSR is reliable indicator of official neoconservative doctrine, and as much as any such thing exists, WJSL is one of the most orthodox universalist newsrooms in Watch Corps. The fact that the two are sending more or less the same message makes the Pakistan situation unusually easy to understand, which is why it's so like a good Bajulius. Anyway, Mr. Haqqani is, as a little note at the end of the piece informs us, director of Boston University Center for International Relations and the author of Pakistan Between Mosque and Military, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, 2005. He also has served as advisor to several Pakistani prime ministers, including Mrs. Bhutto. This is a ripe, rich turd in a suit, a mob lawyer, an abettor of thieves, a peddler of lies. In a decent world, this man would be in prison. Here are his words in WJSR 11/8/2007. The whole piece is priceless, and I quoted it all. Pakistanis say no, Hassan Haqqani. When General Pervez Musharraf suspends Pakistan's constitution, declared a state of emergency, and put the nation once again under martial law, he expected limited civilian resistance and only ritual international condemnation. In view of his role in the war against terrorism, on both counts, Mr. Musharraf appears to have been badly miscalculated. Translation, you're effed with the wrong people, now we're going to F you. Note how also Haqqani declines to use General Musharraf's title. I'm not sure of the Pakistani military etiquette on this. Perhaps it's not quite as serious as pissing on his mother's grave. More Haqqani. Pakistan's burgeoning civil society, led by lawyers and encouraged by lawyers ousted from the Supreme Court, is refusing to be cowed. Translation: your time is over. You little Pentagon poodle, quit while you still can. Haqqani: protests are spreading despite thousands of arrests and the use of tear gas and batons against peaceful demonstrators. Translation: your pathetic policemen will never dare to resist our vast rental mobs. They don't even have the guts to shoot, let alone keep shooting. Haqqani: more than 1,700 attorneys have been jailed, but still more are taking to the streets. University students have joined the lawyers, and former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto has vowed to violate a ban on public meetings by leading a rally on Friday. Translation: look, Rupert Murdoch has donated the top of his op-ed page to help us whip our mobs into a frenzy of lawless street violence. You have no chance, Buster. None. Haqqani: there are a number of important reasons why Pakistan's attorneys are leading the protests against Mr. Musharraf. They have a long tradition of activism for rule of law and human rights issues. In 1968-69, the lawyers started the campaign that resulted in the ouster of Pakistan's first military ruler, Field Marshal Ayub Khan. They also were at the forefront of the campaign against Mr. Zia-ul-Haq, whose 11-year military rule ended when he died in 1988 plane crash. Translation: our trained lawyers have been scheming for power since you were in short pants. They're pretty good at it now. Isn't it time you clicked over to orbits.com? Flights out of Islamabad are pretty crowded this time of year. Haqqani: the legal fraternity has another advantage in that they can afford to confront the government without fearing starvation for their families. Some 65 million of Pakistan's 160 million people subsist on less than $1 a day, while another 65 million survive just above the poverty line. The poor are willing to participate in organized rallies, just as the one that welcomed Mrs. Bhutto back to Pakistan on October the 18th and was targeted by suicide terrorists, but they generally avoid protest demonstrations where getting arrested and missing work is almost inevitable. Translation: our lawyers are already fat with graft. They can do this all day, every day, for as long as you're willing to sit on the pot. But if we're starting to get bored, maybe we'll call out the real mobs. Haqqani: they could change in the days and weeks to come, although Mr. Musharraf has taken all private and international television channels off the air. Images of the protests are seen all over Pakistan through the internet and with satellite dishes. Middle-class Pakistanis and, interestingly, the poor are making it clear that they want political freedom, along with an improvement in their economic prospects, and do not consider prosperity and democracy to be mutually exclusive. Translation: and we don't want to have to go that far now, do we? Try reading my lip, bro. I'm not sure we're really connecting here. Haqqani: the international community has also responded more strongly than Mr. Musharraf expected. The Netherlands has suspended aid, and several donors are reviewing their policy on military and economic assistance. The Bush administration is hoping to defuse the situation through assertive diplomacy, but withdrawal of aid supported by several congressional leaders remain a possibility. Translation: the New York mob is 100% with us. The Washington people are leading our way. F with the bull, get a horn. Haqqani: since 9/11, Mr. Musharraf has positioned himself as a key Western ally in the global war against terrorism. Translation: this part of my message is for the Pentagon. Haqqani: but in recent months, he has been too distracted with domestic politics to play an active role. Translation: we can neutralize Musharraf completely. You will never get anywhere with him. Haqqani: the more he has to repress critics and political opponents, the less Pakistan will be able to fight terrorism. After all, when troops have to be deployed to detain Supreme Court judges, journalists, and lawyers and politicians, there are fewer troops available to fight terrorists. Pakistan's intelligence services can either spy on dissenting Pakistani civilians or focus their energies on fighting Osama bin Laden and his ever-increasing number of deputies and operatives around Pakistan. Translations: we're so tight with state, we can pee in your boots and tell you it's raining. Okay, Haqqani, but Pakistan needs to fight terrorism for Pakistan's sake. Mr. Musharraf cannot endlessly blackmail Washington by hinting that he would withdraw anti-terror cooperation if the U.S. pressures him on other issues, including democracy and human rights violations. Translation: besides, you think you're using Musharraf, but it's the other way around. Haqqani: one thing is clear. Mr. Musharraf's authoritarianism is being challenged by diverse elements in Pakistani society. Translation: we have two Mexicans, a spade and a tranny, who calls herself Marquetta. She can shoot out of, blah, 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 but she says, like you, don't make her have to change her mind. Haqqani: his self-culminating cultivated image as a benign dictator as a thing of the past, and his recent harsh treat measures have failed to frighten Pakistan's civil society and political opposition into submission. Translation: have I mentioned that you're doomed? Haqqani, the defiance of judiciary and the media might not immediately topple Mr. Musharraf, but it could render him ineffective to a point where the military rethinks its options. The army will soon recognize that the only thing keeping the general and his civilian cronies in power is the army's support. It risks further alienating the Pakistani people and losing their respect as long as it continues to act solely in the interests of Mr. Musharraf and his small band of political allies. At some point, the professional soldiers will wonder whether they should risk their institution's position to keep him in power. The army is Mr. Musharraf's support base and is a major beneficiary of U.S. security assistance, having received $17 billion since 1954, with equipment worth several $100 million currently in the pipeline. Since 2002, the U.S. has subsidized the Pakistani army to the tune of $150 million per month. The army is also a stakeholder in Pakistan's growing economy, which benefits from international aid and investment. If Musharraf's autocratic policies threaten Pakistan's prosperity, the army is likely to be less unanimous in its support of its commander. Translation: perhaps you're not ready to hear it yet, but maybe your people are. Are you sure they're still loyal? Anyone can read the writing on the wall, old man. Haqqani: already there are signs of economic fallout from the political turmoil. Rumors of an anti-Musharraf military coup on Monday caused the biggest one-day decline in 16 months on the Karachi Stock Exchange, resulting in losses of an estimated $1.3 billion. Pakistan's credit rating has been revised downward in anticipation of further civic unrest and international sanctions. Translation: our guys are lawyers. They can always find work. We don't care if we have to destroy the economy, but perhaps someone on your side does. Are you counting on him? I wouldn't be so fast, old chap. Haqqani: Pakistanis are used to coup d'etat, where the army takes the helm of the government. Things are different this time. In the past, generals have suspended the constitution to remove from power unpopular rulers, usually weakened civilians, rightly or wrongly accused of corruption, as was the case when Mr. Musharraf ousted Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in October 1999. Translation: I'm too smart to say whether Nawaz Sharif was corrupt or not. After all, you never know. The future could hold anything. Haqqani: this is the first time an unpopular military ruler has suspended the constitution to preserve his own rule. In doing so, Mr. Musharraf has clearly overplayed his hand. Translation: you started it, but now we're going to end this crap one way or another. Haqqani: Mr. Musharraf cannot blame a civilian predecessor for bringing the country to the brink. If there is an internal chaos in Pakistan today, it is of the general's making. After all, it was his arbitrary decision to remove Supreme Court Justice Iftikhar Muhammad Chowdhury in March that initiated the political crisis, which led to the current state of emergency. Translation: and your boots are still getting wet. How dare you resist us? How dare you? Haqqani: Justice Chaudhry, on the other hand, has become a symbol of resistance to arbitrary rule. The man who refused to roll over and disappear, unlike earlier judges who cooperated with the military rulers or simply went home when their conscience dictated otherwise. Justice Chaudhry's call upon the legal fraternity to go to every corner of Pakistan and give the message that this is the time to sacrifice for the supremacy of Pakistan's constitution has drawn elements disillusioned with existing political leaders to anti-Musharraf protests. Translation: Article 37 of the Pakistani Constitution specifically states that all disputes shall be resolved by mob violence. Cut it out with this martial law crap. If you have people, let's see them. If not, why are you still here? Haqqani: among Pakistani political leaders, Mrs. Bhutto has emerged as a viable civilian alternative to Mr. Musharraf, with political support at home and acceptance abroad. As the only politician in Pakistan to publicly describe Islamist extremism and terrorism as the principal threat to the nation, Mrs. Bhutto was initially measured in her response to Mr. Musharraf's reckless actions. She demanded that he restore the constitution and call elections as scheduled. Translation: look, Pinky has been very patient with you. Haqqani: she demanded that he restore the constitution and call elections as scheduled. She hoped to change his attitude with the threat of putting hundreds of thousands of supporters in the streets without actually doing so. But Mr. Musharraf's stubbornness is changing that position. Translation: but she's starting to get a little fed up. Haqqani: like many in the U.S., Mrs. Bhutto appeared worried about directing attention away from fighting terrorism and destabilizing Pakistan further. But leaving the anti-Musharraf campaign leaderless is not an option. She has positioned herself as an opposition leader who respects the sentiments of the people, but is also willing to accept a negotiated settlement that restores the constitution, ends persecution, and results in free and fair elections leading to full civilian rule. Translation: as you see, Pinky is prepared to be quite reasonable. Haqqani: so far, Musharraf has shown no inclination to negotiate in good faith with Mrs. Bhutto or the international community. With each passing day, the Bush administration's hopes that with its help, there could be a transition to democracy in Pakistan with a continuing role for Mr. Musharraf are diminishing. Unless Mr. Musharraf changes course quickly, the U.S. will be compelled to start looking beyond him to a more legitimate leader. Translation: perhaps you should be reasonable as well. Haqqani: Mr. Musharraf seems determined to put his own political survival before the rule of law, actions that warrant the label dictator. Pakistan's attorneys and increasingly the rest of its citizenry seem equally determined to prevent this from happening. Translation: in summary, join us or die. Thanks, I'm all done here. A big hand to Rupert for helping make this message possible. Mr. Murdoch, you've come a long way in your efforts to avoid the fate of Lord Black. And to all the good folks at WatchCore, remember we're on your side. And that's the entire article. I mean, Logos, what's there to say? This is just a complete dead end vomit from Moldbug's perspective. I mean, he's not even... What's even the point?
Oh, I was muted. Sorry. Yeah, I agree. There's nothing much here. It's almost like one of his poems. He's just cynically reading a newspaper. But then again, I mean, we take that for granted because most of us read the newspaper that way these days.
Well, yeah. But the other thing... right. Yeah, I know. It was just... whatever, bro. It was just like... I don't even know what to say. See, Moldbug loves the sound of his own voice. That's part of the problem. That's why these are so long, too. Anyway, I don't mean to be too flippant here. Oh, of course, Logos, of course.
Of course. Moldbug doesn't mean to be too flippant. Moldbug, of all people.
Of all people. No. I don't mean to be too flippant, guys. This is obviously serious business, but if Marx was right about anything, he was right about history and farce. Now, here's another article. Some say, someday, same day, same paper, but this one is on the bottom of the front page of WJSL, as it were. This is hard news. Failed courtship of warlord trips up U.S. and Afghanistan. I have no idea who Jay Solomon is, but it doesn't matter. Not at all. Perhaps you've seen All the President's Men and you think the life of the elite Washington journalist is all about diving through dumpsters and making secret rendezvous with anonymous informants in scruffy phone booths. I'm afraid this is not how it is. If you are someone who can get his articles on the front page of the WJS, as many pre-written stories as you could possibly ask for will show up in your email every day. These are not even press releases. They are messages directed directly to you. But if you don't print them or if you screw them up in some way, they will stop coming and you will fall off the front page. The task, however, is basically the normal journalist tasks of rewriting official information dumps to make them seem as if they were written by an intelligent person with judgment and character. This one, as we'll see, is obviously from the State Department. The U.S. is struggling to find tribal allies in Afghanistan and Pakistan as it tries to beat back the resurgence of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. I hate to break it to you, kids, but we're winning. But when you're winning, the allies struggle to find you. In alienating a powerful warlord named Jalal-ud-Din Haqqani a few years ago, however, some U.S. and Afghan officials argued that the Americans may have shot themselves in the foot. Okay, here is the money. First, note the sourcing. Clearly, officials mean state and or CIA. In case you've been in a cave for the last 30 years, these two are likely these days. Second, note the reason Mr. Haqqani, I'm sure the coincidence of name is coincidental, is fighting. He's fighting for emotional reasons. He's obviously a deeply troubled young man who only needs time and peace to heal. This is absolutely typical of the rhetoric of these stupid little wars. To the Hawks, our enemies fight because they hate us. They will always hate us, so they must be destroyed. To the Ravens, our enemies fight because they hate us. Their hearts have been hardened by our callous and cruel treatment, but with enough hugs and candy, they can be made to love us again. Well, I got a question, Logos. Do you know what Moldbug's position on Ukraine is?
I don't, actually.
Because he seems here to be critical of the U.S. war machine, but Since Moldbug's return, he seems to be much more establishment focused, and I wonder what his position on Ukraine is.
We'll have to bookmark it and look into it, huh?
We will. We will. Do I need to tell you how insane both these attitudes are? They are both perfect examples of Conquest 3 laws, and they are exactly the reason I support a complete shutdown of U.S. foreign policy with no exceptions at all, dissolving state completely and folding defense into homeland security. Perhaps we can rename it national security. Anyway, Mr. Haqqani is now one of the major rebel leaders roiling Afghanistan. Back in autumn of 2002, he secretly sent word that he could ally with the new U.S.-friendly Afghan government. The warlord had once been a partner of the Central Intelligence Agency and later closely collaborated with Osama bin Laden and the ruling Taliban. CIA officials held talks with his brother Ibrahim and made plans to meet with Mr. Haqqani, who was leading some of the Taliban's troops. But U.S. military forces operating separately from the CIA arrested Ibrahim, cutting off the talks and entrenching his brother as a nemesis. Mr. Haqqani is still fighting U.S. troops along the U.S. border. We blew our chance, contends one of the CIA officers involved who worked with Mr. Haqqani in the 1980s. I truly believe he would have been on our side. Just like Uncle Ho, I'm telling you, man, history is a farce. Other senior officials in the CIA and Pentagon are less certain. We'll quote anyone, but the leads go only to our real friends. But Washington's abortive courtship of Mr. Haqqani epitomizes the conflicts and calculations that are complicating U.S. involvement in the region. Sometimes I like to just say nothing at all. I wish that was the case, Logos. I wish that was the case. Don't you?
Yep.
The war in Afghanistan is a major factor in the chaos upholding in the neighboring Pakistan. Spreading Islamic insurgency inside Pakistan is one reason why General Musharraf cited Saturday when he declared emergency rule, though the opposition contends that the move was more about extending his stay in power. Militants in Pakistan's tribal belt are suspected of fighting in both countries, dramatically widening the conflict from the days that was largely confined to Afghanistan. Meanwhile, some officials report that bears are crapping in the woods, with U.S. intelligence officials concerned that Al-Qaeda is using Pakistan as a base to plot new attacks in Afghanistan and elsewhere. Winning back tribal leaders like Mr. Haqqani or eradicating those who refuse to be wooed has climbed to the top of Washington's strategic agenda. The State Department recently pledged $750 million in new aid to Pakistan's border regions, hoping to use economic development and education to peel local leaders away from Al-Qaeda and militants such as Mr. Haqqani. Whoa, okay, let's stop right here. I don't think we need to quote any more of this article. Question, who controls Pakistan's border regions? Answer, the Taliban. Question, so when state sends $750 million to Pakistan's border regions, who are they sending $750 million to? Answer, what are you anyway? Some kind of neo-McCarthyist? In other words, here is what WashCorps is up to in Pakistan. This is its favorite trick. It does this all the time. It just needs to make sure you don't see the aces in its sleeves. WashCorps is fighting a war against itself. Through one arm, it's fighting the Taliban. Through another arm, American soldiers are fighting the Taliban. If you think this is the first step, the first time this sort of thing has happened, perhaps you need to think about switching your history provider. The delusional belief that allows Washington to fight a war against itself without state and defense actually coming to actual fisticuffs in the National Security Council is that you can pay people to love you. The folks over at state genuinely believe that the pushdown tribes can be bought off. If not $750 million, how about a cool $1.5 billion? What's $1.5 billion when we're talking about peace? Besides, it's not really our money anyway. Meanwhile, up in Peshawar, they're not exactly stupid. They're just perfectly aware they're being paid to fight the Pentagon, just as if they were paid to fight the Soviets. New century, new evil empire, same difference. After all, if we stopped fighting, wouldn't state just stop paying? The more we fight, the more we seem to get paid. Funny how that works. Why, it's almost like having an actual job. And the same exact thing is happening with Bhutto and her cronies, and even with Musharraf. If Musharraf actually destroys the Islamists, his cash pipeline from Arlington will dry up. Sorry, old chap. Ben's having a little trouble with the printer. He's out in his helicopter today anyway. Something about jumbo loans, but we'll call you just as soon as he gets back. Cheerio. But at least Musharraf is actually capable of fighting the Islamists, whereas Bhutto's only solution is to pay them, and pay them again. She will smother them as poor, broken, mistreated men with her warm, wise, Cambridge-educated love. And surely they will love her and us, etc., etc., etc. If there are any remaining disputes between, perhaps the United Nations can settle it. Wouldn't it be nice if the United Nations could trust America again? This is the entire pattern of watch course foreign relations for the last 65 years. At least it's a sort of MySpace diplomacy with buckets of cash. The entire point is to pay people, typically extremely sordid and nasty people, to let us be their friend. And look, how many friends America has. Conquest third law, dear reader, I rest my case. Meanwhile, hold on a second. Conquests laws. Because I think he's misusing the third law here. The third law is the simplest way to explain the behavior of the bureaucratic organization is to assume that it's controlled by a cabal of its enemies. But that would mean that Moldbug is saying that the State Department is controlled by the Taliban and whoever America's fighting. I don't think that follows, Logos.
Probably not.
Let's see. Meanwhile, the poor bastards in the U.S. military are fighting against suicide bombers whose wallets are stuffed to the gills with their own tax dollars. We're writing so much money on northern Pakistan, you probably can't get a latte in Peshawar for less than $20. Now, I will say that I can't say if this is the case in Pakistan, but this certainly was the case with the rise of ISIS, because ISIS ended up acquiring a lot of U.S. military hardware.
Mm-hmm. So the Taliban, after he pulled out of Afghanistan.
So in this regard, once we get through all the verbal diarrhea of him reading the Wall Street Journal, this aspect of Moldbug is correct.
Yeah, seems that way.
Couldn't we at least mark the bills so we can see where it's going? I mean, when you send $750 million to Northwest Frontier provinces, how do you do it? Do you send in Ben Bernanke in a heavily armored Apache and have him dumping bales from Tailgunner's seat? Or do you just write a check to Mullah Omar? If so, where does he bank? Of course, Mullah Omar is happy to take cash, even dollars, and he's certainly not afraid of all the lawyers in Pakistan. What are they going to do? Sue him? I'm not an expert in the Quran, but somehow I don't think it says anything about batons and tear gas. So it's fairly clear what you can expect if Musharraf loses and Bhutto wins. Khomeini 2.0 with nukes and ICBMs. Hey, it worked for Carter. Perhaps Condoleezza Rice will get the Nobel, or Rice and al-Zawahiri. Could they be meeting already? Okay, hold on a second. Let's see. Who succeeded Musharraf? Still president. Muhammad Mayam Sumra. Okay, yeah. Because I remember Bhutto got assassinated, I think, sometime around 2011. So she's no longer an issue in a. Oh, that's the current one. Hold on. Who replaced Musharraf? Because basically what he's saying is if like the blue tribe got its man into Pakistan, they'd be run by radical Islamists. But I'm trying to see who succeeded Musharraf to see if he was right or wrong. Yeah, I don't know who this guy is. Asif al-Zadari. I don't know whose side he's on, so I can't confirm or deny Moldbug's prediction here. Anyway, enough of this mockery. The bottom line, in my deeply humble and quite sincere opinion, is that it's time for an independent Pakistan. In case you're not familiar with the word independent, let me go through its etymology. It starts with in, which oddly enough is a kind of Latin for not. Then the second part is the dependent bit. I'm not quite sure what that means, but the whole construct would seem to imply that Pakistan or the Pakistani government or someone is not in some way dependent on, I don't know, anyone else. Like, as in, it can do whatever it wants and nobody will cut its allowance. And nobody will raise its allowance because it has no allowance. And if it decides that the best way to handle a mob of lawyers is a couple of bored sergeants and a douchka, nobody who's not actually within it at most 100 kilometers of Rawalpindi has any reason to care, not even the Wall Street Journal, unless it is like a slow news day or something. Thanks to reader ZK, who may or may not endorse the result for a much useful background. Wow. 3/4 of this was absolute garbage. The last quarter was kind of correct in light of what happened in 2021.
Yeah, I posted in the chat too, our chat, a Gray Mirror article where he talks about Ukraine because you're curious about what his stance would be on that.
Yeah, let me just look that up real quick, guys, because he's supposed to be, against the U.S. military intervention in these small wars. Wow, that's a lot. That's what I see what he says here. He doesn't seem to like it. He calls it a tragedy on autopilot. So at least he appears to be consistent now with his position about the U.S. military.
That's what I took from it while I was scanning it.
Yeah, which I suppose is probably the main thing to say in favor of Moldbug. Okay. Well, everybody. UR's advice for President Musharraf, November the 9th, 2007. Since it's nice to criticize without offering positive suggestions, here's what I'd do if I were President Musharraf. 1, abolish the Pakistani constitution. Don't suspend it, abolish it. I'm not a Pakistani, nor am I closely familiar with the events in Pakistan, but it strikes me just on a casual perusal of the papers that if your constitution were a nuclear reactor, it would be Chernobyl. If it was a bassist, it would be Sid Vicious. If it was a ship, it would be the Edmund Fitzgerald, etc., etc. Well, a leaky reactor, a homicidal rhythm section, or an overloaded ore carrier are not exactly things you want in your living room. Each one beats the heck out of a malfunctioning constitution. And do you really want to go in there with a wrench? Just toss the thing. History is littered with discarded, failed constitutions. The failure of the Pakistani constitution does not reflect in any way on the residents of Pakistan. It reflects on whoever wrote the Pakistani constitution. In fact, it doesn't even reflect on them. It's an engineering failure. It happens. 2, abolish politics in Pakistan. Politicized democracy in the Indian subcontinent has failed. Its record is murderous at worst, criminal on average, and disgraceful at best. Your present enemies are not in any way, shape, or form atypical, except, of course, that the Soros people have done so much for the PR. I mean, this is just stupid. I mean, obviously what he's doing here, Logos, is he's using current events as a way to highlight some of his crazy theories. But as we've already said, you can't abolish politics. Politics is just what happens when a sufficiently large amount of people work together on any project. I mean, remember, Logos, there's no politics going on right now in Disney, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
No politics at all. We abolished it, bro. Just look to the big man running Disney, and everybody's going to fall in line. Simple as.
Simple as.
I mean, well, what kind of childish retardation would lead you to think you could abolish politics? I mean, why would you even think that, Logos?
I don't know. Even he admits that you can't truly have an amoral system because he's not that. What do you say that he was exactly? Like, to be stereotypically nihilistic or strawmanny nihilistic. He used some very derogative term about the type of nihilism it would take to actually abolish all moral considerations, and the way he seems to be implying here.
Mm-hmm. Here is how to abolish politics. Involuntarily retire all Pakistani judges, journalists, and editors, teachers and professionals, NGO employees, and politicians. Pardon them fully and unconditionally for any crimes they may have committed. In fact, award them half-pay pensions for the service to Pakistan, which was counterproductive but often sincere. Seize and permanently confiscate all media and publishing firms in Pakistan, all party buildings and funds, all private schools and universities, and all non-government organizations. Abolish the parties permanently, reorganize and rename the schools and universities, confining their mission to science and engineering. Import Western or Western-trained scientists and engineers at competitive salaries to bootstrap university departments. Put army officers in charge of NGOs and handle them case by case. Well, hold on a second. How is this not like Soviet-style complete nationalization?
It's a good question.
And if it isn't different at all, how is he not a communist?
Well, everything's formalism or democracy. It just depends on the context. We've been over this.
True. So is this Moldbugian state-run socialist formalism?
It could be.
I mean, because Musharraf is a dictator, a military general, right? So it's the state doing it.
Well, if he got ousted, then it's not formalist because he didn't have the Ring of Finargle.
True.
Is it the young chimp or the old chimp, Todd? We have to know on next week's episode of Dragon Ball Z.
And invite any Pakistani entrepreneur who feels sympathy with the old regime to join this purge. They can sell their companies to the Pakistani state for the full present market value. You can pay for this by printing money, canceling the proceeds when you re-privatize the company will equalize the inflationary balance. Let anyone who is considering selling now, however, that the offer will not be repeated. 3, expel all Washington official journalists and imprison or expel their choice, the stringers. Make any contact with the Western official press illegal. Pakistan is a modern civilized country, or at least many parts of it are. It's not North Korea. It cannot be turned into North Korea, and it should not be turned into North Korea. Pakistan cannot be made opaque to the West. Well, the closest thing I can think of to what Moldbug is talking about is like the Islamic Revolution in Iran, which would be a Islamic theocratic takeover, which he said he didn't want in the last article.
Yeah, you see, it's like that, but it's not actually theocratic, so it's good when he does it.
Okay. However, the West can be compelled to get all its news from Pakistan via the internet. There will be both pro-military and anti-military Pakistani bloggers. Some of them may even be the journalists who have just retired. This is totally fine and normal, except in as much as they are directly organizing violence, demonstrations, rioting, etc., but do not interfere in any way, shape, or form with bloggers. Censorship is difficult to reverse because when you lift a system of censorship, you look weak. And when you impose censorship, you also look weak. So you get it both ways, as we say in San Francisco. In fact, it might be a good idea to run official contests for the best supportive, neutral, and dissident blogs using independent judges and awarding fat prizes. Your goal is to create a situation where anti-government intellectuals have nothing to complain about except the fact that they are not in charge of the government, and in which that fact has no conceivable prospect of changing. Wow, that's a pretty not so subtle self-insert, huh, Logos?
Yeah, it is.
Once this is achieved, your enemies can blog up any kind of storm without threatening the state in the slightest. As Bismarck put it, they say what they want, I do what I want. This was probably not really true for Bismarck, but there's no reason you can't make it true for you. 4, declare independence from the West. Start now politely declining all aid, military or financial, from any Western country. You won't be able to buy Western quality arms or parts anywhere, but you can get stuff almost as good from Russia and China. Follow Putin's lead in prohibiting any financial traffic or organizational affiliation between any Pakistani organization and any non-Pakistani, except for, of course, genuine commercial or financial links. The NGOs are your enemies. There is no way to buy them off. It's them or you. 5, announce that you will respond to any invasion of Pakistan with a nuclear strike on Delhi. This is known to be within your plausible power. It is sufficient to deter the West, and it will not strike Westerners as aggressive, except possibly toward India. Right, Logos. Another nation threatening to use nukes will not be perceived. Logos, U.S. invaded Iraq on the premise that they would use nuclear weapons against their neighbors. What is Moldbug talking about?
Yeah.
Like,
I have no idea.
This is like so brain damaged. Iraq was invaded on the premise that it had WMDs and would use them.
Right.
So if Pakistan threatened to actually use WMDs, global sanctions.
Yeah.
It's like the world according to Moldbug. I have no idea what this is. For your new nuclear posture, your objective is defense against any adversary with stronger conventional and nuclear forces. Declare that your standard response to any sustained infringement of Pakistani sovereignty will be to destroy one foreign city, perhaps Delhi, although anything big will do, then surrender unconditionally. The key to this strategy is that it is plausible. An attacker has no good reason to doubt that you will follow through. The goal is not to win a war, but to prevent one from happening. The adversary has to decide which he prefers, the status quo or the status quo plus ownership of Pakistan, but assuming the destruction of one city. Ideally his own, but any hostage will do. In my humble opinion, as long as Pakistan is not itself behaving aggressively, there is no superpower on earth today that would even consider considering B. Perhaps such a power is conceivable, but it is hard to conceive given how demented its rulers would have to be. 6, crush the Islamists. Give any armed organization on Pakistani territory 30 days to disarm and surrender, flee the country, or be destroyed with the Pakistani army. You are equally amenable to all these options. Offer unconditional amnesty to all rebels who surrender within this period. Require all Islamic schools to register and all Islamic teachers and scholars to be licensed by the state. Prohibit them from promoting violence. Pay them for their good work. fortify the border with Afghanistan, sealing it except for border posts until further notice. The Americans will really be pissed at you for a while, but they are not uniquely utterly stupid, and they will be happy with the results. No, they won't. Iran basically did all this, and look at the U.S. position on Iran today.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're still ready to overthrow the Iranian government.
I think the biggest difference, though, is that Iraq, we lied about having WMDs, but if Iraq actually had WMDs, we probably would have invaded it.
True.
Iran, we think, is developing WMDs and pretty far along. That's why the panic's setting in. I think the implicit premise here is that because Pakistan already has nukes, and the West knows they have nukes, there's a range of stuff we cannot do to Pakistan that we can do to other countries. For a good example of this, like look at the left-wing memes about Libya, right? Gaddafi agreed to a weapons proliferation treaty, got rid of his nukes. What happened to Gaddafi?
Yeah.
Now, Pakistan's not going to do that. So the West's hands are tied in the way they can respond. When you have a country with nukes.
Yeah. Well, here's the problem, right? He says, but they are not utterly stupid. Well, that has not aged well at all because we've implemented global sanctions on the world's largest nuclear power.
Well, we can implement sanctions, but that's why Moldbug's entire strategy is to decouple the economy of Pakistan from influence of any Western powers, and just make it like a private corporation that can be invested in by whoever.
Well, the idea of decoupling from Western economic access Pakistan is already doing that with China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Yep, they're starting to now. Although Moldbug might say, but making it self-dependent on China isn't really the type of independence it needs to do. It needs to be like a fully private corporation.
Well, they have to, because they can't fight India on their own.
Well, exactly. That's the problem, right? Moldbug wants to treat the world as if nations can just one day, for no reason at all, isolate themselves into little self-contained neo-cameralist corporate states. But global politics is like way more complicated than that, so it's not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Suggested the Americans add their own layers of fence so the border will be double sealed and allow them to do this with Pakistani labor if needed. There was no good reason to allow informal pedestrian traffic across the Durand line. 7, for extra credit, declare the future of Pakistan looks like Dubai, only better. Not all Pakistanis have been to Dubai, but they pretty much all get the idea. You can get a leg up on Dubai by convincing Pakistan of the world's first sovereign corporate republic, and SCR is a little like the monarchy structure used in the UAE, except that it works even better. It's a government design that should be at least as efficient as any modern Western corporation. It's designed to be invulnerable to any kind of systematic corruption. There you go, Logos. There you go.
There you go.
I guess Disney's immune to any kind of systematic corruption, right?
It is. Absolutely. I don't know what you're talking about, Todd.
While the thing has never been tried and its success may be debatable, the SCR design certainly scales much better than the old medieval family business approach. I mean, I don't know. The Habsburgs at one point had, control over large tracts of the world. That medieval game lasted well into the modern age. In my humble opinion, a Pakistani SCR will make Dubai look backward. Your goal should be nothing less than a new equivalent of the Mughal period. Westerner tourists should be astonished and envious when they see Pakistan as they are in Dubai, except more. The region, now Pakistan, was once one of the jewels of the world. It can become once again. Any Pakistani SCR must start with a single initial owner, the Pakistani army. Wait, Logos. I thought the army was just this, useless, cheerleader on the side.
That again?
I thought the army was just that useless cheerleader on the side that doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, on great authority, that's the case.
So I don't know what this clown is talking about with the Pakistani military. At present, this is unavoidable because the army held all the physical power in the country. Formal and informal power should always be identical. However, military rule is not a desirable structure over the long term, not for the military, not for anyone else. Therefore, the army should convey ownership of the Pakistani corporate republic to its own officers, active and retired, and soldiers, distributing shares by rank and seniority. Whatever this distribution, it must be final. There are no further automatic dilutions. All new hires are just employees, whatever their rank. A state, like any organization, is stable and efficient when those who own it are those who control it. However, this does not mean the owners and the employees must be the same people. If agent, employee, and principal owner can separate, the state will be much more stable and much more efficient. Owners need not even be residents of Pakistan, although this restriction should be retained for the feasible future. The 20th century is not dead yet. Both in principle, any geographical pattern of residency among sovereign owners is undesirable. For maximal stability in a corporate republic, shareholders should be distributed around the financial world. Thus, there is no method by which a subset of shareholders can benefit themselves and only themselves by using their voting power to induce the republic's managers to mismanage it in a way that produces selective profit. Well, there you go, Logos. There we go. We're done.
Yep.
Solve that problem. Selective profit exists whenever a corporation's dividends are not distributed formally and equally among its shares. Selective profit is always, and in every case, corruption. If a company favors one subset of shareholders or creditors in general, in any way not contractually specified, it is corrupt. The other general form of corporate corruption is agency profit, in which the employees abuse their power of agency to skim off cream which should be going to the principals. Agency profit in government is much better understood. Since selective and agency profit are generally contrary to popular belief, rare in the Western corporate world. Rare. There you go, Logos. Rare. Don't you forget that.
Mm-hmm.
They should be equally easy to defeat in a sovereign corporate republic. Pakistan today has a reputation for corruption. In an SCR, this reputation will adhere to its proper target, the old constitution. The goal of any newly established SCR is to move to 1 on international transparency ranking and stay there. 8, for serious extra credit, create at least one special economic zone whose currency of both exchange and accounting is gold. There you go, Logos. There you go. There you go.
Oh, no.
You may be surprised at how many people this annoys. You're one of them, Logos. How much it annoys them. You may also be surprised at how profitable it will be for Pakistan. To be precise, a 21st century gold standard implies a 100% reserve banking system run on the principles of Austrian economics with strict maturity matching on all loans of any kind. This is not unlike certain interpretations of Islamic finance. Perhaps the point could be finessed. Well, there you go, Logos. What more could you want?
Wow.
Transitioning from a fiat currency to a gold standard is tricky. It's not unlike landing a plane. There are many ways to do it wrong and one way to do it right. However, once this problem is solved correctly, it remains solved indefinitely. And at least if the Austrian analysis is correct, it is very clear that the first sovereign state to succeed in the transition will have at least the option of becoming the new financial capital of the world, as London was in the 19th century and New York for the most of the 20th. You might want to talk to Ben Steele. I bet he has some ideas of how to pull it off. Update. Please see the comment thread. There are many interesting discussions. I promise that I will actually answer questions in a reasonably prompt and diligent manner. Well, there you go, Logos. I'm just, Musharraf needs to have that ring of Finargo and we're all good.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thankfully, something short. Half Sigma goes large, November 10th, 2007. The word epical and stunning come to mind. Congratulations, HS. I assure my readers that I am neither a skinhead nor a white supremacist living in some compound in Idaho, stuck with survivalist gear. I'm an overeducated professional living in Manhattan. The Times article is here. Congratulations also to Amy Harmon. I spend a lot of time ragging on the Polygon, but Gorbachev or Deng types are always welcome. Update Larry Astor's take with all due respect to the Book of Ecclesiastes. So that must just be responding to people in the comments. He's really on to Pakistan, isn't he, Logos? Pakistani emigres on the Musharraf question, November the 10th, 2007. Ali Ertraz in the Crown-Eyed, the swarthy fellow at Sapia Mutiny, Ali Ertraz. There is a segment of Pakistan which includes the judges, lawyers, and journalists which wants to take to the streets. They have dominated the news over the past year, and they want to make a democratic push, with some people casting the lawyers in the same role as the Burmese monks. However, Musharraf's shrewd move of setting forth a limited PCO targeting only the judiciary and leaving the assemblies intact has neutralized this segment of the population. The illusion of popular participation is retained, while Musharraf's most vexing political opponents, the judges, get sidelined. If he had gone further and canceled elections, it would have ignited a firestorm. But in his talk to the Pakistani public, discussed below, he assured that he would do no such thing. Disengaging Western audiences, pumped full of the current pro-democracy intoxicants, will almost universally decry Musharraf's behavior. I decry it too, precisely because I am disengaged Westerner and I have that luxury. However, the story in Pakistan is not so straightforward. While I'm being told by Bazari merchants, some young professionals, and some industrialists in Karachi and Lahore, is that they merely care for stability, whether it comes from the military or in the form of democracy. Incidentally, many of them believe that it is Musharraf who is more likely to assure that stability. A couple of people with middle-class businesses suggested to me that Musharraf should behave more like a dictator, a secular version of the previous Islamic dictator Zia-ul-Haq, in order to assure stability for business and economic growth. However, that is a minority view. The democratic push in Pakistan is not some sort of romantic affair pitting slaves against a demonic genocidal Stalin. Musharraf made his errors, like the Red Mosque fiasco and the disappearances linked to the war on terror, but he is not homicidal. Cinema, music, the arts, and freedom of press are thriving in Pakistan. The popular satire program We Are Expecting has a regular character mocking Musharraf, which does people nothing more than grunt and proclaim yes in a loud voice. Musharraf has, in fact, helped the Pakistani economy and business, admitted even by democracy-promoting analysts. Until this year, when the democracy push struck, construction projects were booming and money from Dubai was pouring in. In fact, a study published by the anti-military newspaper Dawn showed that, nonetheless, in the 8-year period since the latest takeover by the military, the size of the economy increased by almost 50%, and that of income per head of the population by nearly 25%. Sepia Mutiny commenter Shah Chazi, he allowed almost unprecedented freedom of expression, both in electoral and in print media, after 1999, and far and away much more than anything Pakistanis had known under either of the Bhuttos or Sharif. In 1999, for example, Pakistan had a single TV channel, PTV. Today it has dozens, and several very good political talk shows, which are in fact better than Indian, or for that matter, American political TV talk shows. These have actually been responsible for the high expressions of political and civic life that educated Pakistanis have now come to have. The quality of journalistic reportage and editorial comment in Pakistani newspapers is also very good and has improved substantially during his regime. And BTW, at an individual level, he is smarter by far, like 2 standard deviations smarter than Sharif and Benazir. But together, and he is certainly at least twice as articulate as they are, and communicates extremely well, both in Urdu and in English. Even more, his grasp of geopolitics and international macroeconomics is at least 5 times as good as that of Benazir and Sharif. He's nobody's fool, and for a dictator, his tolerance for personally directed criticism exceeds that of any other comparable political figure across continents and political systems. And as I said earlier, all the repression he has set loose so far is quite tame by South Asian standards, even by Indian standards. Let's give the man some credit. SM commentator Kush Tandon, Kachani, I must give you that. You are one of the few commenters on this thread who knows about what they are talking about. Ikram also knows quite a bit. You are right, Musharraf did not dissolve the legislative bodies. Musharraf is not going anywhere. America needs him. Most of the Pakistani middle class needs him. It is true that he is seen as a traitor who sold to the West by a lot of people on the street, and that puts him in a very tight spot. It is Zia-ul-Haq's changes in Pakistan society that is becoming somewhat a problem. BTW, Human Rights Watch, is a bunch of mostly suits from NYC who collect newspaper cuttings like a high school sophomore does for their scrapbook. They run like headless chickens who talk about $500 per dinner plate parties in NYC, want them to hear there's absolutely no in-depth analysis or sometimes even common sense. They are not Bob Woodwards and Carl Bernstein's of human rights. There are plenty of opposite voices on the Scipia Mutiny thread as well. You can pick your own side. Okay. Here we go. Formalism and nukes. This ought to be good. This ought to be good, Logos.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Okay, let's see. Nuclear Neocolonialism, a formalist design for nuclear law, November the 12th, 2007. Formalism is the idea that conflicts can be eliminated by specifying their results in advance. If only were that simple, Logos.
Yeah, right.
I thought it was about keeping promises, though.
I thought it was.
And before that, I thought it was about determining who owns what.
Well, that's basically consistent with what he's saying here. He's basically returned back to his old definition.
Yeah. The idea is that people seem to fight a lot less when both sides know what the outcome will be, as long as the obvious answer and the right answer to this question are both obviously the same. No one has any temptation to test the system, and therefore it is stable. For example, you are in a state of precise internal formalism if, whenever anyone fights the law always wins. Precise internal formalism is always desirable. It is the same thing, sometimes known informally as rule of law. However, nuclear weapons are generally considered overkill in domestic situations. BTW, what's up with Sarkozy? Wasn't he supposed to be doing something with some sort of German power washing machine? Wiping the scum off the streets like Travis Bickle? It's always pretty embarrassing for French when the Italians start to get ahead of her. Anyway, in this piece, we are considering precise external formalism. The word precise in anything Moldbug says is a farce at best. This is, of course, matches the old school entity once known as the law of nations. Note also that the connection between Vattel and present day concept of international law is quite attenuated. However, we are considering neither the old law nor the new law. Frankly, we are not sure either can be described as an absolute and total success. And there is no reason why either should apply particularly well to the nuclear era. So it seems sensible to start from scratch. The goal is a simple and stable system of rules in which neo-hominids are very unlikely to find themselves getting fried in their own homes and apartments, even in a world where H-bombs of hellacious destructive power are getting easier and easier to make. Frankly, it was pretty stupid to think that this technology, awesomely cool, yeah, though it be, could remain a secret for the next umpteen gazillion years. For precise external formalism, our design goal is not to prevent nuclear war, but simply to predict its result. Will Nepal be able to annihilate Bangladesh, roasting Dhaka to a fine crisp, without any harmful results besides a dose of the West's usual heart drippings? Or will vast burning clouds rain like new peaks in the Hindu Kush? Frankly, you can't get too war nerd with this stuff. No sane person can take it seriously. Under nuclear formalism, the goal of inspection is not to prevent, just to inspect. Nations manage their relationships according to their nuclear capabilities. This is basically how it works now. Anyway, you just get smeared with ponds of gooey self-righteousness. So let's just say West bumcrap declares that it has a nuclear program. Fine. We all know about how you West bumcrappers, frankly, were surprised you can't stand in a box to snag a banana. And what can we say about your mothers? What can't we? But you say you have a bomb. Okay, we are going to hire us some inspectors. You will be paying for this inspection. Every cent is billed to you, taxpayers of West B. Our guy flies first class and they expect good food. If you have any good food in West B, our inspectors will expect you to disclose the complete state of your nuclear program, which except for technical secrets, they will forward to the public. Their goal is not to dissuade you from building bombs. It is just to understand your capabilities. How many bombs do you have? What are your delivery mechanisms? Do they actually work? The inspectors will clearly demand all kinds of testing. They will probably take your word for it that the warheads and missiles actually work correctly in a single strike. You won't have to pick out a Polynesian atoll and nuke it from halfway around the planet. But inspectors will want to see testing of both designs in a way that demonstrates that assembly is at least feasible. They will want to look at your entire production chain, and they will especially want to see where you got your gear from if you didn't reinvent it yourself. The idea is to eliminate uncertainty in nuclear conflicts, which is the most plausible case of an actual outbreak of actual nuclear war. Gun nuts say that you shouldn't point a gun at someone unless you're ready to use it. They are trying to protect our others from their own stupidity, but they're also trying to protect themselves. The less plausible it is to criminals that the victims won't shoot if they lunge, the less likely they are to test the proposition. To make comparison easier, an inspection authority, which can be a private business, can define formal standard levels of nuclear capability, which entranced to the nuclear game may try to achieve. Standardizing capability levels let nuclear strategists think in simple categories about nuclear game theory. Since in a democracy, every citizen gets to be a nuclear strategist, simplicity counts. Under precise external formalism, any formal system of rules for disputes between sovereign organizations or Sovorgs with nuclear arms, note that the same model of inspection may, of course, be extended to conventional weapons, must take into account the relative military power of the Sovorgs. Today's nation states are, of course, Sovorgs, at least all are nominally sovereign, but there's no reason why relatively informal terrorists, mafia, or guerrilla organizations cannot play the nuclear inspection game show, although it is difficult to see how they can compete unless they at least control some substantial contiguous competent of territory. The whole point of formalism is that the formal law should match informal power. It is all very good to say that what the law should be, but no law can enforce itself. Whether or not it is officially announced and precisely described, whatever gets enforced is the law, and whatever doesn't is just a bunch of crap. It's pretty lame to have one system of law which is official and another which is actually enforced. However, it does seem to happen a lot. Sometimes there are even reasons for it. Well, I mean, Logos, this is what's stupid, right? By international law, this is just necessarily the case. Because international law is just an agreement between sovereign nations. So you can't be sure that they're always going to agree in the same way that private citizens under a state could.
Exactly. Yep. You can't
That's
really
just
have private agreements between states and call it formalism. It's just not going to work.
Well, yeah, I mean, unless you want a one world government to police the states, there's no way to ensure that these states are going to live up to their obligations.
Right, and that's actually an interesting issue I don't think we've talked about before when talking about the neo-cameralist model. If all these states become like self-isolated little corporations, that might solve the domestic problems of formalism, right? They have full sovereignty within their borders. But how do you solve the problems of countries making agreements with each other? Well, the idea is that formalism is supposed to put an end to all violence, but you have a whole bunch of these independent sovereign corporations, and they're all probably wondering if they're the young chimp or the old chimp in any conflict. So, violence all over again. I don't know.
Yeah, nothing gets solved here. Okay. Speed limits in the U.S. are a good example. There was a reason that speed limit enforcement is in the U.S. discretionary. It allows cops to use their discretion. When this discretion is abused rather than used, as in the notorious Port Orford speed trap, we feel violated as if we'd been, with a flashlight, and we decline to eat in Port Orford ever again. But whether we like it or not, there is a use for discretion in domestic law enforcement. This is not true, however, in the law of nations, at least not under precise external formalism. Precision is essential when deciding rules which bind competing sovereigns. Your territorial waters may end at 200 miles, or 173 miles, or 389.2 miles from your coastline. They have no good reason to end at a couple hundred miles or further than I can see or a safe and prudent distance. When rules are imprecise, they may be interpreted differently by different sides in a conflict. This can confuse the sides into believing they are acting in self-defense. Unless you are so stupid that you abjure self-defense, a condition in which there is simply no hope for you, you have to act. In most recent wars, both sides have held this perception. Well, you see, Logos, the problem is worse. As we're seeing this domestically in the United States, we might actually be seeing the same thing on a newsreel. We might be seeing the same thing in a document like the U.S. Constitution, but we all think that thing means something different.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you are precise in your wording, and the founding fathers were precise for their time, we read that today and read something totally different out of it.
Yep.
So it's a much more complicated question to solve than just merely defining it precisely for once. And furthermore, what do you do with somebody that, well, this is implied game theory. And of course, game theory has a whole host of problems, like non-Western societies that the United States has been fighting, say, from the Cold War on, don't use the assumptions we do, right? By game theory assumptions, the Taliban should have just threw in the towel, right, Logos?
I don't know about that.
Well, I mean, the United States assumed that under the pressures, the carry and the stick pressures it was giving, they would have gained control in Afghanistan, and they totally failed.
Yeah, well, the issue with game theory isn't really the assumptions of game theory. It's just the what do the actors consider to be rational behavior? That's basically it. If two people don't agree on what rational behavior constitutes, then they're just not playing the same game. And that's something that game theory already says. So I wouldn't say that's a problem with game theory. It's just a problem with rationality assumptions.
Okay. And nuclear deterrence imprecision is especially expensive. It can result in a nuclear exchange. It is impossible and counterproductive to expect nuclear weapons to not be used for conventional deterrence. NATO itself used nuclear weapons for conventional deterrence. It is really difficult to castigate the West B as some kind of huge moral sinners. Let's say they're NS racist cannibals who eat Jews for lunch, using their slaves as tables for adopting the same nuclear strategy as NATO. But if you use nuclear weapons for conventional deterrence, you have to have some kind of red line beyond which no attacker may go. While this line may be determined by an independent system of formal resolution rather than by yourself, if it is not actually read, there is no point at all in having it. And if the line is defined imprecisely, an attacker may interpret as aggression what you interpret as self-defense. Thus, both sides are acting in self-defense, the normal mental attitude in any state of war. This is one essential engineering principle of nuclear law. The other principle has already been mentioned above. Formal power and informal power should match. In other words, there should be no informal incentive to break the formal rules. This is why we need formal nuclear performance inspectors. With nuclear performance inspections, we can understand the informal game structure of any conflict between Sovorgs. This allows us to devise formal rules which pre-resolve the conflicts. For example, here is one simple system of nuclear law that relies on performance inspections. This design is conflict-free and non-proliferative, however, it is not politically correct. First, there are two types of Sovorgs, nuclear and non-nuclear. Second, delivery is assumed and inspection is as simple as possible. Anyone who can test a working bomb is a nuclear Sovorg. Inspectors define working by their own judgment. Third, every non-nuclear Sovorg must maintain an official affiliation with one, and only one nuclear Sovorg. The non-nuclear Sovorg is the client of the nuclear Sovorg, which is the protector. A nuclear protector and its affiliates are a nuclear bloc. Either the client or the protector may sever this relationship for any reason at any time. Fourth, an unaffiliated non-nuclear Sovorg or total defector has no protection. Anyone may conquer and retain it. If multiple forces make the attempt, they should try and agree on a partition beforehand. Fifth, in all suits between nuclear and non-nuclear Sovorgs, whether or not the latter is affiliated with the former, the nuclear power prevails in all disputes except those solely affecting the territory of the non-nuclear Sovorgs, in which case the non-nuclear Sovorg prevails. Essentially, a non-nuclear Sovorg controls its borders, everything inside them and nothing else. Sixth, all suits between non-nuclear Sovorgs within a single nuclear bloc are judged by the protector. All suits between non-nuclear Sovorgs in different blocks are judged by arbitrators appointed by agreement of both protectors. The same is the case for suits between nuclear Sovorg, which hopefully will be rare. Seventh, non-nuclear Sovorg allows its territory or the territory of its affiliates to use for the planning or preparation of military attacks against any other Sovorg. Noting only this rule cannot be invoked to demand any restrictions on free expression. Eighth, missile defense systems are prohibited until they can be made as reliable as missiles. If this technical assessment changes, this rule should be revisited, but any missile defense should be a joint effort between all nuclear Sovorgs designed only for total defectors. It should be clear that anyone who feels the need to break these rules is a major psycho and needs to be suppressed or at least contained by any means necessary. The idea of asymmetric war, a war in which different sides play by different rules, is one of the thickest jokes of the 20th century. If you could explain this concept to Emmerich de Vattel, he'd be retching for hours with awful, agonizing laughter. Wash Corcoran stop playing this game anytime it decides it's done. It should also be clear that this design is anti-proliferative and nuclear protector has absolutely no incentive to allow its clients to go nuclear. It would lose a customer and gain a competitor. Therefore, it will require that any client which does not have a nuclear program be prepared to prove it, and it will sever its ties with any client which does not comply. Presumably, the latter will happen in time for the client to be devoured like a shark in the Shark Tank by its local competitors, perhaps with some military aid from the protector if absolutely needed. If the rogue Sovcorps to find another protectorate, will face exactly the same ban. Nuclear powers will also place golden handcuffs on their nuclear scientists, paying them like rock stars and placing restrictions on their movements and communication. There is no reason to do otherwise. Not all scientists will accept this bargain, but enough will. Note that the system for nuclear law does not come with any transition plan. There's no obvious way to get from here to there. Perhaps it involves blowing some crap up, though, which would be definitely cool. It's hard to escape the feeling that the post-war West is suffering from a series of progressive melee phobia. I mean, it's difficult to see how this is a whole lot different from what we already have now, which seems to be the inside joke of Moldbug. And then two, he hasn't solved the enforcement mechanism.
Yeah, which is also how it's difficult to see how it's not like we have now.
Well, yeah. Well, the other thing too is, I mean, maintaining a nuclear arsenal is expensive. So if he says, why would somebody tolerate a client going nuclear? Well, because if you're in a block together, you may not be able to have enough nuclear weapons to counterbalance someone else and defraying the look. It's all about cost cutting, right, Logos? I mean, if they're all corporations, why not cut your costs and outsource nuclear armaments?
True.
I mean, why not? They do it all the time in every other way.
I mean, also, never mind the nukes, but this protector status coming with military obligations and support is also really expensive. Fast forward to 2016 or 2017, after Trump was president, when he's talking about how we should give Japan nukes back so they can defend themselves.
Yeah. Well, we do seem to be getting through November slowly. Who the heck is Ben Steele? November the 15th, 2007. Okay. Readers ask, who the heck is Ben Steele and why should I care? Actually, everyone should care who Ben Steele is. At least everyone who has more than a couple $100 in the bank. Ben Steele is this person. He's also the author of this article. I'll let you see who is this person. If the link still works. Doesn't look like it does. Okay. And if you prefer the dulcet tones of his gentle yet masculine voice, you can listen to him here. And I don't mean to sound a conspiracy theorist, but when the CFR and Ron Paul are singing the same tune, you can be pretty sure the fat lady is at least in the building. Again with the CFR logos. Most importantly, Ben Steele is singing, which means he's not quacking. The 20th century was the century of quack everything. Perhaps most infamous was the great Soviet quack geneticist Trofim Lysenko. But quackery in its Eastern edition was crude and unsubtle. Its associations with brute force were impossible to conceal, and it seldom lasted long enough when that force was removed. No, the post-war Western University is our true Valhalla of quack. Quackologists will be studying the system for decades, and they will certainly not get bored. The sad fact is that almost everything studied and taught in Western universities today is quackery. The only exceptions are some areas of science and engineering. For example, I'm pretty sure that chemistry and biochemistry are generally quack-free. However, if Lee Smolin and Peter White are right and Luba Smoltl is wrong, we are beset even by quack physics. We certainly have a quack poetry, quack computer science, and quack history. Journalism, for example, is quack history at its finest, and figures such as Freud, Rothko, and Mann read the whole thread, or at least to the Piltdown Man bit. Mead and Ashbery will have to appear on a list of history's greatest quacks. Their achievement may be surpassed, but how can they ever be forgotten? And then there's economics. Oh, here we go, Logos. Here we go. This is going to be your area. Pretty much everyone thinks of 20th century economics as seethingness of quackery, including most of the 20th century economists. All they disagree on is who the quacks are. It is incontrovertible that the quack economics is alive and well in the world today. It is possible that the Austrian, Chicago, George Mason, New Keynesian, and post-autistic schools of economics are all quack. It is certainly not possible that they are all non-quack. So how can you tell the difference between a real economist and a quack economist? I'm afraid a bit more than $640,000 is writing on this question. Here's my answer. Please feel free to refute it in the comments section. I have an open mind, but it tends to close after a while when it doesn't hear any good arguments. Well, given Logos that he hasn't changed his opinions really at all in 16 years, I don't think that's true.
Which part in particular?
Well, he said he's open-minded and willing to change his mind. Well, he's saying the same thing 16 years later. He hasn't changed his mind on anything.
Yeah, that's a good point.
He doesn't mean that. No, Logos. So sorry, we got to read Moldbug maximally charitably to determine the true Moldbug. He just hasn't heard any good arguments yet. Duh. Wow. My test is that a real economist is an economist who believes that any quantity of money is adequate. A quack economist is an economist who believes that increasing prosperity or continuing prosperity demands a continuing increasing quantity of money. Uh-oh, Logos, shots fired.
Mm-hmm.
What, you got anything to say?
I mean, this is just insane. Money fuels your market transactions, which means the more people, entities, and whatever demand money to fuel transactions involving stuff you make, the more money you need to fuel those increased transactions. This is just physical reality. If there aren't enough dollar bills to go around for people to do business, business stops. I don't know what to say.
Wow. There is a word which means an increasing quantity of money. Wait. Yeah. The word starts with an I. However, in the 20th century, this word started to be used in a new way, meaning an aggregate increase in prices. While the two phenomena are certainly related, using the same label for both doesn't strike me as the ideal way to elucidate the relationship.
Okay,
But
that's
when
based. That's based.
okay,
I've been complaining about this all the time. Everybody complains about inflation when prices go up, but there could be shock reasons they do it. Price of fuel goes up, um, dangerous shipping conditions or something, so it's taking longer for things to get here. Any sort of supplier bottlenecks or rapidly increasing demand. Like there's lots of explanations for increasing prices that aren't always inflation, which is just money supply stuff.
okay. And when you realize that this new meaning largely dominates in modern English usage, leaving no word at all for the old meaning, the needle on your quack detector may start to pop a little. For this reason, I prefer to borrow a term from a slightly different department of finance and describe an increasing quantity of money as dilution. If there is any ambiguity, one can eliminate it by speaking of monetary dilution. As for an aggregate increase in prices, the obvious word is appreciation, which can be further categorized as asset price appreciation and consumer price appreciation. The general use of the word I in newspapers today is the latter. No precise or objective distinction between assets and consumer goods can be constructed, of course, but the same can be said for the index baskets generally used to measure consumer price appreciation. Any number produced by a subjective index is fudge. It may still be useful, but it is useful only to the eye. Anyone who plugs any subjective number into any mathematical formula or model is a quack, period, but I digress. Thoughts?
Mostly based.
Okay. So we can reframe our quack detector by declaring that there are two kinds of economists: those who believe that monetary dilution is essential and those who believe it is inessential.
Okay, that's not based. Monetary dilution is only essential if the demand for your money grows. You have to print money to keep up with demand. If demand for your money isn't growing, then there's no reason to print more of it. It just causes needless confusion. So it's not a matter of being essential and inessential. Essential and essential for what is the key question.
Yeah. Not only is this a Boolean distinction, it is a very sharply polarized one, and as we'll see in short, the conditions for a great quack hunt can only be described as ideal. Our razor is as simple as it should be. Dilutionists are quacks, non-dilutionists are non-quacks, unless, of course, they are peddling some other brand of quackery. There is no ambiguity at all. The test applies to any economist or supposed economist, past or present, professional or amateur. If the voters of a democratic nation are infected with quack economics, their government will hire quack economists who peddle quack prescriptions. As Miguel Ferrier put it in RoboCop, that's life in the city. Well, there you go, Logos. I guess you're a quack now. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess so.
You know what I want to know, Logos? If this 100% gold-backed bank is such a good idea, why has nobody done one yet?
I mean, we did. We all stopped doing it for a reason.
Well, but what I mean is, like, we've had libertarians now for 50 years. Why hasn't any libertarian produced a credit union or a private bank that does this?
That's actually a good question. I'd love to see one put its money where its mouth is.
Like, seriously, it's been 50, mainstream libertarianism has been around for like 50 years. Why hasn't anybody who's a libertarian produced a credit union or a private bank that operates along these standards? Well,
I don't know.
we know why. Because you can make more money on annual dividends through an inflationary fiat currency banking system than you can through a gold-backed banking system.
Yep.
And that's why they won't do it, because they'll have lower annual returns. Well, yeah, they necessarily will, right? Because less money's being loaned out.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, you're capped by how much money you can have in circulation.
And how much money, how much capital you actually have to have on hand that you loan out, right? So I think it's like for every 1 unit of currency, you can loan out 10, right? For the banking system we have now.
Yeah, the reserve ratio. I don't know. They changed that a lot. I don't think it's fixed. I think it depends on different factors.
Okay. Alrighty. For example, one common belief among amateur delusionists is that the economy of some country grows, another fudge factor, by 3% a year. Its currency should also be diluted at 3% a year. Any professional economist, quack or non quack, knows that this makes no sense at all. No serious economist believes it in the exact numerical form stated above. However, it's a common belief among the general public, and delusionists seldom seem to disabuse them of it. Why is delusionism quackery? This is actually quite easy to see. Modern currencies such as the dollar are fiat currencies. In principle, there's nothing at all wrong with fiat currency. There is no valid economic objection to paper money, and there is no economic connection between delusionism and fiat currency. In principle, it is perfectly easy to imagine a fiat currency system with a fixed quantity of currency. Whatever your monetary system, money is a good like any other. It is a measure, not a measure. It is not it is not a measure of value or a claim on wealth. It is a commodity, whether virtual, paper, or metallic. The reasons that people are willing to exchange so many nice things for money and the reasons they choose one form of money over another are complex. We'll save them for another day. What makes money money, however, is that most of all, people who hold money hold it not in order to use it directly, but in order to exchange it for other goods. True, you can write a phone number on a $20 bill and you can melt down a Krugerrand and make it into a golden spoon, but neither of these uses are relevant to 99.999% of the people who hold 20s or Krugerrands. In other words, when most people make decisions about money, they are concerned about with exchange rates between money and other goods. The price of non-monetary goods and money, any change in the money that does not affect the quantity of goods they can obtain in exchange for the quantity of money they own will not affect their behavior. Therefore, monetary systems can be denominated neutrally by rescaling the currency so as to affect all money holders in exactly the same way. For example, Turkey recently stripped 6 zeros from its currency. Each million old Turkish lira was converted to one new Turkish lira. All contracts denominated in old Turkish lira were rewritten in new lira, and so on. This did not amount to a 99.9999% wealth tax. It did not change the behavior of Turks or anyone else in a non-trivial way. Similarly, if Turkey had doubled its currency so that every million old euro was now 2 million new lira, there would have been no non-trivial effect. Oh, where'd logos go? Hold up. All right, everybody, we lost logos. Let's see. Oh, Logos said that he had to leave. So, well, guys, this is a little unusual. We're going to have to stop in the middle because this is a lot of finance stuff, and that's kind of Logos' wheelhouse. So, everybody, we'll pick up with the 2 million lira, I guess. Thanks for tuning in. This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Fike podcast, signing off.